Good evening. I'm here filling in for Mark Nunberg while he's away leading a retreat this week. My name is Shelly Graf. I'm one of the guiding teachers at Common Ground. So, and a longtime student of Buddhist studies, so I haven't attended in a little while, but yeah, I've learned a lot from this program. So I'm happy to be here with you and share my reflections. And before we do too much talking, we'll sit together. And we usually start with the refuges, right? So we'll do that now. As the words settle into the heart, just taking a moment to remember why we're here. Just doing a short reflection on our values, why we care about meditating or practicing meditation in a community. And we can just watch the energies settle, even with a simple reflection like that. And somehow it doesn't have to be a chore to find our way to presence, mindful awareness. But we remember that we have a body. Mindfulness comes to the fore naturally. And there's no pressure to rush anything. At some point, the breath might become focal, obvious. And when that happens, just don't stop it. It doesn't matter where we notice the breath. So because we care about presence, we just decide to feel it. Get to know it, be close. Know what it's like to have a body that's breathing naturally without any demand from us. Breath can be how the breath is. Any kind of breath is good breath. It's natural, born of its own causes and conditions. We don't have to do anything with it, just know it, feel it. And as awareness is steadied by the breath, we might even notice the difference between the in-breath and the out-breath. Again, no pressure, no need to force the noticing. Just allowing the in-breath to emerge when the time is right. And the out-breath to be what it is. Even noticing half an in-breath is enough. As mindfulness is steadied, it will be possible to notice the breath more fully. The in-breath, the transition, the out breaths. We'll know when we're trying a little bit too hard. Some tension will build. We'll remember the instruction to relax. When the mind is present and we're feeling the breath rooted in the body, these subtle noticings of effort naturally emerge and we naturally adjust. Again, it's not a big program that we have to do to get it right. And sometimes the breath will be in the foreground. And sometimes it'll recede into the background with more of a whole body awareness that includes the breath. We can just be curious about these movements without demanding anything of awareness or of breathing. And in some moments, we'll forget about the breath completely. And that's just what we call practice. So we just remember to care about continuity, to trust awareness. Let that bring us right back to the body where we can find the breath again. Nothing has to be a problem. There's nothing to get, nothing to achieve. It's just this, just nature expressing itself like this. Let's continue in silence now. minute to stand and stretch your legs if you'd like to. You've been stepping away from the computer for a moment, a couple minutes. All right, here you've been talking about awareness of breathing. A couple classes in, so this is week 3 of an 8-week class. Hi, Gabe. And so I thought tonight I'd give an overview of the first tetrad again. I know Mark has been talking about that, and we'll maybe lean into the first step of the second tetrad. We'll see if we get there. Yeah, and it might be nice just to give this overview to reinforce some of the important points as I have understood them, and just to hear things in a different voice can sometimes be useful too. So a lot of my understanding has been shaped by Mark Nunberg and also Gil Fronsdal. So just so you know, going to give those 2 teachers a lot of credit right up front. And it's a awareness of breathing practices, a nice teaching because it's so succinct. It's 16 steps, and so you get some kind of succinctness in the steps and the logical movement through them, but also it's a complete teaching of the whole path, right? Which makes it really inclusive of all of the Buddhist teachings. And as I understand it, the Buddha hardly talked about how he practiced. He talked about what he understood, but he never said, this is what I'm doing, or not often said, this is what I'm doing when I'm practicing, except the few occasions when he would go off into the forest for some retreat, month or more, and he would tell his students, if anybody asks where I am, just tell them I'm practicing awareness of breathing, right? So we get some sense that it was an important teaching. And if you look through the many schools of Buddhism, almost, as I understand it, every lineage, every different sect of Buddhism has some awareness of breathing practice there. So it's an important teaching, right? And there's a story that I heard from Gil about the Buddha and his son Rahula. This is when Rahula was ordained and practicing with the Buddha, and young-ish, I don't know how young, but a child. And they were out for alms rounds, as the monks do all the time. They go out with their bowls and the community feeds them, right? So they were doing this, and at some point the Buddha said to Rahula something like, you shouldn't care that much about your looks. He's maybe a teenager at this point or something like that. And it was something that the dad or teacher, the Buddha, peeped from his child, that he was being associated with this revered teacher, and he kind of felt proud of that, right? He's there hanging out with the Buddha, going on alms rounds. And so the Buddha was like, oh, let me help you kind of dull down that pride. And maybe Rahula was felt scolded or something like that, but ended up going back to camp and not continuing on the alms round. And when he got there, he felt bad, that he wasn't out getting food, no food for the day for him. And Sariputta, one of the Buddha's main students, was back at camp and said to Rahula, when the Buddha gets back, you should ask him to teach you to meditate. And so when the Buddha got back, Rahula did that. And the Buddha gave some preliminary instructions and then taught Rahula mindfulness of breathing. So we get a sense in many different ways that this is a quite an important teaching. And perhaps, it's deeper than just what might be obvious, that and we can see maybe perhaps some of that depth when we look at like Rahula's age. He was a teenager. And so this mindfulness of breathing is really teaching us to not be so superficial, right? To not care that much about external gratification, but to learn to seek the internal gratification from this deeper capacity to soothe and calm the heart and know the depth of truth, right? So in teaching this awareness of breathing instruction, the Buddha is pointing Rahula back to something that's ordinary, that's elusive, especially to a teenager teenagers can be, I've worked with teenagers for 20 years, so I know, I love them, and they can be we can all be at times quite motivated by how things seem to other people, right? And the Buddha said, if you practice like this, Rahula, it will be very beneficial to you, right? It will really be supportive. And he also said, if you practice like this, you'll notice the ending of your last breath. You'll notice, it will take you all the way up to your death. And we can infer that the Buddha is suggesting that if we practice in this way, calming ourselves with mindfulness of breathing, then the death might have a good chance of being peaceful too, right? If we're not afraid to notice the arising and passing away of experience, even up to that moment of our death, then we're at acceptance. We're at acceptance with life as life is unfolding in front of us. That little statement, I feel so kind, I love it that the Buddha's talking to his son here, and it feels like such a kind offering. Like, I'm going to give you something that's going to take you through your whole life. You're not going to regret it. It's the most sustaining thing. Practice in this way. And it's really going to support you at that moment when things are tough, right? So mindfulness of breathing is both a linear progression, step by step we can see, and also a general trajectory of the path that we're on when we live a mindful life. Yeah. And although things can unfold for us in this way from step 1 to step 16, you have probably seen already in your own life that it's not quite like that all the time, right? So we might sit down, notice the body, bring awareness to the fore, which is what preceded the 16 instructions, the Buddha saying, rest in mindfulness, rest in awareness, right? Bring it to the fore. And we might feel the body, feel the breath, feel that exclusive attention on the breathing. And then we get hijacked by a pithy thought or something really juicy, right? Does ever happen to anybody, or it's just me? Thanks for your honesty, at least some of you. So awareness of breathing is both a natural order of deepening relaxation and developing a strength of intimacy with experience as it is, so that we come to understand something that's really invisible to us most of the time, right? And as we go through the steps from gross to more subtle, the least visible of our experiences become more obvious, right? So these 4 tetrads, these 4 groupings of 4, they follow the 4 foundations of mindfulness from gross to subtle, right? The first foundation, mindfulness of body. The second foundation, mindfulness of feeling. The third foundation, mindfulness of mind. And the fourth foundation, mindfulness of dhammas, which is really how the Buddha laid out the processes that lead us towards liberation. And where we get hung up, and also how that natural unfolding, how it happens. So a movement towards insight and liberation. So in the first tetrad, there are 3 tasks. This is the way Gil's mind works. To recognize what's here, to feel it, and to relax with it, right? So to recognize the breath, to feel the breath, this is the breath in the breath, right? And then to really relax. And that relaxation then supports a deepening of insight. And just like in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the first tetrad is about the body, right? And the other 3 are about the mind, right? So we are establishing mindfulness in the body, in awareness of breathing, with the breath that arises in the body, right? And we're feeling the body. We start with feeling the breath that begins as being long. It's the more gross experience, and then getting more subtle as the body starts to relax, as the mind starts to relax with the breathing. Then the breath becomes a bit more subtle and refined, and often more short, right? So the first instruction is to notice the breath when it's long. The second instruction is to notice the breath as it's shorter. And then as the breath becomes more refined and the experience of breath and body becomes more subtle, then the breath can actually recede into the background. And what we notice is not just breath, right? Even though we are committed to understanding experience through the breath is in the background, and the whole body is in the foreground, right? Because the breath becomes more inclusive and experience becomes more inclusive, not needing to leave anything out. And then in the 4th step, the instruction is really just to relax, yeah? To relax and allow experience to be experienced, right? So we're not ever trying to control the breath. We're allowing the breath to be the breath. It can sometimes feel like that constrictedness, right? When we're noticing the breath and trying to hold on to it and study it, but it's really not that. it's kind of ironic that we're studying the breath by being as relaxed as we possibly can, right? And it's as the mind gets more easeful, and it starts to be willing to accept that, oh, life is just happening on life's terms, right? It's not actually a me here doing this. This is just nature expressing itself. So it's not a problem if the breath is long, it's just long, right? It's not a problem if the breath is more short and refined. It's not a problem, actually, if the mind gets hijacked by thoughts, and then we remember that there's this body that's breathing right now, and we return and begin again, right? None of that has to be a problem because it's just nature. So in that relaxation and that ease, wisdom is really guiding the way, right? It doesn't make sense to be relaxed if we have to try to be in control, right? And so it can require a great deal of a feeling of safety to be able to do this practice. I think maybe it was on night one where Mark talked about how tightly insulated and thoughtful folks were about constructing this room to keep in the floors with so many nails so they didn't squeak, right? Because that quality of that spaciousness, even of our physical environment, can be supportive when we're doing this, what seems like quite vulnerable inner work. Right? And so in this first tetrad, we're learning to trust that kind of seclusion, intimacy with experience, and rely on it as a guide. And that's not an easy thing to do. Have you noticed all the ways that the mind kind of gets fighty about the instructions? I do. Like, oh, so many thoughts like, oh, this isn't for me. I don't have good concentration. I'm never going to have good concentration. And sometimes the instruction will be to set down that in that seclusion when we're relying on the breath as a teacher, right? And the breath and the body as a teacher, and the sympathetic relationship between between body and breath and mind. It's always that. Then, it can start to feel like, well, this isn't enough, right? So setting down the world in order to be exclusive with this experience that we're having right here and now. Like, I can always make a lot of reasons why the world is important, right? My life is important, my relationships are important, all the things of the world are important. But I don't think the Buddha was saying that the interconnectedness of life and the way it manifests in our relationships and in our social world is not important. He's just really guiding us towards that deeper feeling of trust and movement of life and nature as nature. He's actually saying, like, oh, you don't have all the control that you think you have, sweetie. And if you really want to wake up and learn how to move about and participate in the ways that we want to for our own and for our collective well-being, then we need to develop the skill of surrendering, of really surrendering to nature. And so using the breath as a tool towards that aspiration of learning how to surrender. It doesn't deny our participation. Like, we can see there's effort happening when we're practicing in this way or with any other experience or object, right? Like, there's some personal effort that calls us to sit down and stay here with our own experience and not get up and do other things or leave the room. There's some care that's happening. Yeah. And so it's not like we're ceasing in any kind of responsibility to participate skillfully. It's just that we're learning also how to surrender and let the participation come from a deeper understanding, right? So the first tetrad, all about the body. The first thing we do is establish mindfulness to the fore. This is the Buddha, establishing mindfulness to the forefront, always attentive. One breathes in with mindfulness and breathes out with mindfulness. So this isn't about controlling the breath, right? It's just about getting to know it. So when the breath is long, we know the breath is long. When the breath is short, we know that too. And the whole body, that the breath recedes into as the breath recedes into the background in step 3, we can start to feel that calming experience that's there, and how the body and mind are not separated from each other, right? Which is really what we get with step 4, that it may seem like body and mind are two things. It may seem like that, right? And it can be useful to study the body and watch this intersection of body and mind. But really, the body and breath are just so sympathetic that it's, what distinguishes them is not even that obvious anymore, right? They're just vibing. So we want to really get to know, what is the breath like right now, right? And we can start to feel into some of when we notice the breath, we can even feel the movement of our day or the movement of our life through our breath and the way it's manifesting in our body, and perhaps the energy that's there, if the energy is intense or the energy is more subtle, and get a sense of all of the cause and effect relationship with body, mind, and through our participation in our lives. And this willingness to keep returning to the breath and learning from it, this seclusion helps us learn that we don't have to rely on our thoughts as our sole source of information, which is what we do most of the time in our lives. We're very conceptual creatures. We think about things. We want to solve problems conceptually, right? And here the Buddha's like, well, what happens if we still that thought? What kind of information is yielded when the thoughts are more still or more subtle or barely even noticeable, right? Do we see something about the processes that are at play, right? How we cling to control and ground, right? What it's like to really feel vulnerable, right? Where we can actually find safety in an unsafe world. Difficult. Where is there a sense of safety? So we're refreshing the mind by setting down the world, like all of those stories about the world, right? Because that's where we think we know the world. It's all in our stories about things, right? So when we set down the world, it's not that we set down any kind of care about experience or about other people or anything really. It's just that we're learning to value that refreshing capacity of the mind to just be with this one thing, to just have presence. Now, if we were to ask any of us, like, do you care about being aware? Do you care about living a mindful life? Do you care about being present or being intimate? We would all say, yes, of course, right? But in some moments when we're noticing the breath, we have I'll just speak for myself. I have lots of complaining ideas about how it's not very useful to be with the breath, right? That these are important thoughts to think, right? I need to follow this out. I need to learn this conceptually. But that's where the safety and the vulnerability, it's like a lot of vulnerability to just set that down, right? Let that recede into the background and just rely on this natural process where we're relaxing into experience and learning something about experience that we don't normally see, right? That everything is coming and going, nothing is self. And so awareness of breathing practices teaches us dispassion as well, right? Because awareness of breathing or the breath it's not that exciting, right? It's quite ordinary, right? And as excitement-driven creatures, we're often looking around for something more exciting to do all the time, even something more exciting to think, right? Because we will pretend that we will convince ourselves that we're solving the world's problems in our thoughts. Yeah. So that dispassion is like learning how to set that down. Yeah, it's not easy. It goes against it goes against our training as human beings, right? As intellectual creatures. And this is, an important part about what the Buddha was teaching to Rahula, is to, not rely on superficial thoughts, ideas, physical features, right? Whatever you might think about yourself, don't rely on that. Trust something more ordinary about experience and see where that leads. And often the training in the ordinary is about learning how to appreciate neutral sensations, right? The breath, it's just so ordinary. It often doesn't feel like much of anything. I remember saying to a teacher on retreat early, about, maybe the first retreat I was on or one of the first few, and this teacher was saying, just get interested in the breath, just get interested in the breath. And I was like really trying to be a good student. And the next time I went back to see this teacher, he was just saying the same thing, just get interested in the breath. And I said, but it's really not that interesting. And he just said, you'll learn. Like, well, maybe, yeah. But this is a deep training of learning how to set down our pull towards just gravitating towards something that's a lot more entertaining than what we might feel when we're just sitting and noticing the breath. I mean, the number of times that I have, like, not noticed the mind that is looking for something more exciting to do I know I'll finish my work at home. I'll go home for a change of scenery. I was at Common Ground this morning. I went home and then came back this afternoon. And like a change of scenery is going to be something more exciting. That's going to help the mind settle, right? Not really so. And then watching the same trap this evening when I was at home or late afternoon, thinking like, oh, it's hard to concentrate here. I'm just going to go back to the opposite Common Ground, right? Well, I'm just doing the same thing back and forth, right? And this is the mind that's just getting caught up in its habits. I was almost late coming in here because I was reading poems from this book, The First Free Women. I'll read you one. This is a collection of poems. It was a modern book of poetry. Maddie Weingast lived with the Bhikkhunis at Alokavihara, and they studied the Therigatha together. And the Therigatha is a very small book of poems written by the first awakened women at the time of the Buddha. And so studying the Therigatha, then Maddie took what he was learning in his study and he rewrote these poems into modern day language. So I find them really beautiful. And one of the things that's so beautiful about the Therigatha in general is that, these women are depicted as they're just ordinary, struggling human beings. Their life wasn't easy. They're people who endured great loss. They had struggles. They were sex workers. They were parents. They were partners. Life wasn't easy. And they talk about all of that. So this is Suba, the goldsmith's daughter. They all told me the same thing. There's only one way to be truly safe. Get as much as you can and hold on tight. We don't take greed seriously enough. I grew up in a house made of gold, so I ought to know. You see what it does to people, slowly, over time. It changes them. It takes over. You find yourself saying, I'll learn to be generous. I'll give it all away. But first, I just need a little more. Stop lying to yourself. See a clenched fist for what it is. Not tomorrow, not in 20 years, now. I am Suba, the goldsmith's daughter, eating whatever is offered, sleeping wherever I can. This is what freedom looks like, not a bucket of coins buried out back. Now, I love this for so many reasons, but that how awareness of breathing can just that call to seclusion and call to question our values, and really the encouragement to look in every nook and cranny for where there might be some holding on to a sense of control, right? A sense of safety in places that aren't going to deliver the goods for us. And the third step is really about the mind and its capacity to relax with continuity when we're teasing out any kind of unnecessary effort. Right? So in the first two steps, well, in the first step in particular, there is some personal effort to keep the breath in mind, right? That's what Mark would say, to keep the breath in mind, an exclusive awareness of the breath. And then with that exclusive awareness of the breath, even though we're remembering to relax and the breath is starting to get a bit more refined. And in the third step, the only way for the breath to recede into the background is to tease out any effort that's holding on to the breath, right? We won't be able to see the breath in the body like that if we're trying to hold on to the breath too much. And in fact, as the awareness gets more subtle, just because we're practicing and remembering to be continuous, this is the work of continuity. It's not personal effort. It's like drops of mindfulness that develop a habit of awareness, right? It feels like it's me doing the practice, but it's just cause and effect. A moment of awareness then supports another moment of awareness. And that habit just strengthens with time, drop by drop by drop by drop, right? And so it may seem daunting, for example, to go on a very long retreat, but it's not because or to sit for a half an hour or a half a day, right? We could call that a long retreat. But it's not that way because that habit grows and does the work that we imagine is personal efforting, right? It's just cause and effect. Awareness is getting strengthened every moment that we're aware, and the mind just learns how to abide in awareness. Just aware, aware, aware all the time. It becomes a natural state, a natural skill, right? And so when we're noticing, when that skill is developing its strength, we need less and less personal effort to keep the awareness going, right? Like in the beginning, we might need to remember, we might need to rest in our aspirations even, or our values. Why are we here? Why am I doing this? And then we might need to just bring awareness to the fore. Just remembering I have a body might be too much, too subtle to do anything else. Then we remember we have a body. Okay, awareness is established right here. And then the breath comes into focus. Oh yeah, now we notice like some tightness, all the activity of my day. It's all just, I feel tight and constricted. Okay, that starts to loosen up a bit. And then as we're just being aware of what's here, then the breath starts to get a bit shorter and more refined. And at that point, if we were to hold on to it tightly, it would cause more tension and stress. We'd be confused. Maybe we are confused in moments, right? So in step 3, there's a refinement of effort that's happening. We're learning how to back off, back up, and rely and trust in relaxation as our guide. And it's only when we're trusting in relaxation that we start to feel that sense of vulnerability, perhaps, but also that resting in nature, right? Allowing the breath to be the breath, the body to be the body, the unfolding of practice to be the unfolding of practice, even if that means getting swept away by thought and coming back. And right. So in this transition between
to the third step, we start to really rely on relaxation more and more, and teasing out the effort to notice that the in-breath and the out-breath, we don't have to hold on to them exclusively. We don't have to make that effort. And we start to see that everything belongs here, right? Which is a deep truth. Sensation, subtle or gross, pleasant or unpleasant. We're just saying, like, any experience, even the experiences that I don't want, even noticing not wanting experience, it all belongs, right? Because it's all a part of the path of purification. So learning how to set down our goals for some end result, right? We're not gonna, that's just more constricting, wanting to get to the end of the path. Remember, awareness of breathing is the whole path. And I don't know about you, but I feel really committed to this path for my whole life. Yeah. And so learning how to just appreciate whatever's here to support our learning is good, right? And especially when it means that what we're noticing is the mind's unsteadiness, or how the mind gets hijacked, and by what, right? By thoughts a lot of the time, right? Or where we get hung up, like, oh, notice the body, but it's hard to stay in the body, or I don't want to stay in the body, or whatever we're noticing is really fair game and important, because it's all a part of the process of purification. And in the fourth step, we're just seeing how this calm and relaxation has a healing effect on the body. It's like the sense of deepening and widening. And the breath is more subtle, and we start to develop some trust that's beyond what we can imagine. So we're not looking at the problem of the body anymore. We're not having that kind of relationship to the body, but how the mind can harmonize with the body, keeping that harmonizing in mind. Feel inclined to stop there. It's about 10 minutes to 9, and I think Mark will pick up where I left off here and talk about the second tetrad, beginning with piti or joy, and that awareness of the body that we start to see the mind in the second, third, and the fourth tetrads more clearly, and the processes that are there supporting or getting in the way of mindfulness. And so our awareness of the body then supports, because this feeling of piti or joy can be an intense one. It's actually a mental state, but it has a big effect on the body because of our establishment of awareness in the body with the breath. Then we start to feel this, and that joy then gets settled into a kind of sweetness that's even more stabilizing and subtle. I'll stop here, and I'll invite any questions or curiosities or reflections. Easy questions though, Tim?
I don't have any question right now. I was just this map is I've practiced it before in the past, and it's really interesting, very elegant, I think. I was practicing last night. One of the thoughts that in my one of the thoughts that interfere with my concentration the most is about work, and like how
like unstable it is. Like, I don't, not that I feel like I'm gonna lose my job, but like I'm like at any moment I could lose my job. I can't really depend on this to be as solid as it seems. And it's really it's something my mind like keeps going back to, and I'm thinking about it a lot. It's this kind of just kind of ruminating on that and so uncertainty. And last night I'm trying to watch the breath and I can't watch it because the thoughts keep coming up. But then at some point there was enough stillness to see like, oh yeah, this is really uncertain. You really can't count on work to protect you or free you or provide for you. Like ultimately, you can't. That's not his purpose. And I like a lot of vulnerability came up, I think, and it then the thoughts really died down to a great extent because the energy just shifted to a more like open and real place that was not trying to like manufacture some plan or some vision about how my life is going and how I spend my time. So yeah, I think the it is difficult and complicated following all those steps, but it seems like the real value is not in like finishing all the steps. It's more just like what comes up along the way. Thank you.
Beautiful and exactly right, at least as I see it. I was reading a little bit from Buddhadasa's book about mindfulness of breathing, and he took a while in the beginning to talk about wise effort. Yeah, because it's when we stop trying to get somewhere and just sort of like you're, I think, illustrating that it might not be the right moment for the breath. The breath just might not be that subtle. It might not be that easy to notice the breath. But when we stop trying to get somewhere by noticing the breath and just open up to what's actually expressing itself right now, then there's a learning that can happen even when the experience is quite gross and the mind is quite busy, right? But it's within, I would say that's within the awareness of breathing instructions. Yeah, but not always what we see when we start to take up the 16 steps. Freda, I see your hand raised here. Let me go ahead.
So I guess just the instruction of I breathe in long, I breathe in short, and mostly I'm hearing Mark read them. And it's like, but now listening to you, I'm thinking you have to get to where you're breathing in long or breathing in short. You don't just think it in your head because that's the next one. You have to be there. So I'm looking for confirmation.
Yes, that's it. And that's embedded in the instructions is like the breath in the breath is how people sometimes talk about it. And it's really to like land in the experience of breathing. So often we're thinking about breathing, we don't even notice the mind kind of constructing little images in the mind, of breath, or, I don't know, the thought of breath, or even noticing the breath is long. There's now a concept of long. We're not actually in the felt sense of the breath. We're in the idea of the breath. So any of these obstacles are exactly how they should unfold that way for us, so that we can start to see something more, right? If we just try to push through the steps, that's not the intention, right? The steps are illuminating the whole path for us. So anything we can see about the path while we're practicing awareness of breathing is good. And so when we start to see the difference between thinking about something and trying to get somewhere, and actually just surrendering and being with it and letting life unfold in front of us, then that's exactly how it should go, right? Because we're staying a learner instead of someone who's trying to get something or attain something. Anything else? Yeah,
I'm also in the Erasmus book. He talks about in plural about the body. He talks about the body breath, the body and the flesh,
uh-huh.
the interaction between the two. So it's the early structure is taken in plural. I don't know.
I mean, perhaps what's being pointed to here is that the breath, that the body and that the breath is arising in the body. And we often try to separate what's interconnected. And there's some usefulness, like to know, oh, this is breath, but then we start to feel like holding on to something too long, then isn't quite right either, because the practice is really inclusive. Everything belongs. And so, oh yeah, there is this body here, and it's not just the breath, the body's always been here. So we start to remember that. And well, oh, wait a second, it's not just breath and body, it's breath and body and mind. And now we don't even feel like, they're always kind of vibing with one another. So I think hard to even distinguish those. And, this is how it goes, like where the heart becomes more and more inclusive of everything. And we just start to see the interconnectedness of life like this. Yeah. Thank you. All right, I think we'll leave it here tonight. So thank you for participating, and appreciate your practice, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And Mark will be back next week.
Thanks, Shelly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.